essays, book reviews, and more than 20 novels, including a great deal of political satire. A thoroughly American life of letters. Christopher Buckley on Uncommon Knowledge now. One of the country's most prolific political satirists, Christopher Buckley graduated from Yale, became an editor at Esquire, served as speechwriter to Vice President George H.W. Bush, then began writing books. Mr. Buckley's more than 20 volumes include Steaming to Bamboola, his 1982 chronicle of life aboard a tramp steamer, his 1994 lampoon of Washington lobbyists, Thank You for Smoking, which was made into a movie, and his 2009 memoir, Losing Mum and Pup, about the year in which he lost both his mother and his father, the journalist William F. Buckley Jr. Christopher Buckley, welcome.
Good to be here.
I should state for purposes of full disclosure that you and I have been friends for 4 decades.
We have backgrounds.
Yes,
there's a backstory.
There's a backstory.
One of the smartest things I ever did was to bring you aboard the George H.W. Bush speechwriting team, and where you, which had been known for a while as the Christopher Buckley era, and then quickly became superseded by the Peter Robinson era. And then you went on to even greater glory as a Ronald Reagan speechwriter, and you wrote probably the most famous words he uttered as president. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Thank you very much. We will edit that out for the purposes. I'll play that for my children only.
I'm here to talk about you.
Oh.
Well, not really.
That will make this a difficult conversation.
Actually, the title of one of my books is But Enough About You.
But exactly. All right, so we start. We start when you and I, no, we start a little bit before you and I actually met each other. You were by the way, you remain what you have been in my eyes for the last 43 years, I think we've known each other, which is the coolest kid I know. Okay, so
you're kind.
By the time we met, you had already been an editor at Esquire. A brilliant start. I remember a profile you did of the King of Spain, who was then a dashing young figure in those days.
Which was titled, of course, The Reign in Spain. Get it?
Not bad. So you wanted to be a writer. Oh, and then there was a Yale Daily, you were not editor of the Daily News,
Yale
but there was
Daily News magazine.
The magazine, okay.
And my colleagues on that staff were John Tierney, who's gone on to brilliant things. He had a 25-year career at the New York Times, and is now leading contributor to the Manhattan
City
Institute,
Journal, yes.
The City Journal.
Right.
Also aboard, Michiko Kakutani, who became the most influential book reviewer in the country. Jane Mayer of
New Yorker.
Now of the New Yorker. She had been at, I think, the Wall Street Journal, but she's one of the country's leading journalists. Lloyd Grove, who was with the Washington Post for 25 years. So it was pretty, it was not a bad talent pool. Myself excluded. I'm building a wall around me, but these were really talented people.
So there you were.
Who went on to great careers.
There you are as an undergraduate, and you've already decided that you want to be a writer. So,
well, with my math skills, such as they were, that writing
computer science was out of the question.
Pretty much the only avenue open to me. But I did want to write, and I did.
So your father was a large figure in many lives, including mine. You're his son. I have thought many times over the years that if I had been that man's son, I would have sold knishes on the street in Manhattan. I would have done anything other than become a writer.
I contemplated a career selling knishes. but at last it was a short-lived dream.
But did it cross your mind, how do I do this? How do I do this while getting out from under WFB?
There are advantages and disadvantages to being in the same business as your father, if your father is a star in that business.
Right.
But I never. He was always, very, very supportive without being. He never once urged me to be a writer, and he was very often, to my disappointment, my best critic. He would say, "This,
Did you pass manuscripts back and forth?
Oh, sure.
Oh, you did?
Sure. But one of the advantages and one of the really great things about being in the same business as your dad is you get to talk shop. And what do writers talk about mostly? I'll tell you what they talk about. They talk about money. How much are they paying you for that piece?
They paying by the word or by the piece? Yes,
Well,
right.
when I was when I was in college, and we all wanted to, my colleagues at the Yale Daily News magazine, we wanted to be was freelance writers. Can you imagine? And at the time, the top pay in the freelance writing field was Playboy, which paid $1 a word. You have to imagine Austin Powers saying that, $1 a word. We, at college, for one of the issues, we decided to send letters to all the famous writers we could think of, saying, the letter began, Dear Mr. Malamud, Dear Mr. Heller, Dear Cynthia Ozick, Dear John Updike, congratulations, you have been chosen by the staff of Yale Daily News magazine as a great writer. And we would therefore like to commission an original piece from you. And we can pay $1 a word. Next paragraph. Unfortunately, our budget means that we can only commission you to write a 10-word article. And you'd be surprised who we got.
Really?
We got Updike, we got Tom Wolfe, we got Joan Didion, we got Bernard Malamud, we got Anthony Burgess. Well, they were all sort of charmed by this.
Of course.
And Tom Wolfe sent us a 20-word piece. The theme was on the end of the world. So that was the
end of the world in 10 words.
Well, so Tom Wolfe wrote he gave us 16 words, and he said, please send the extra $6 to William Styron, the Connecticut novelist, to help cheer him up. And so we were titillated to think that we had been drawn into some kind of literary feud between two of the gods of American writing. Anyway, so we had fun, and some of us went on to write I think it's safe to say we went on to write for less than $1 per word.
All right. Your first book, I have here the 40th anniversary reissue. Your first book is Steaming to Bamboola, a chronicle of life at sea aboard a tramp freighter. All right. And when I reread this after the passage of 40 years, I read the first edition and the 40th anniversary reissue. And in between, I confess I'd forgotten everything about the book.
I'm shocked.
I was delighted to find that it was wonderful. But I thought to myself, I've never quite understood, where is Bamboola? So I looked it up. I actually pulled up an artificial intelligence agent and said, what did he have in mind? And here's what I got. Buckley uses Bamboola as a metaphor for an elusive destination. The phrase thus encapsulates a sense of a perpetual voyage.
You got that from AI?
Artificial intelligence.
That's scary.
So you have introduced a phrase into the language. Where did this book come? What's the inspiration for Steaming to Bamboola?
I was sent off to the Benedictine monks at the age of 13 and for boarding school in Rhode Island. Sad to say I've been a disappointment to the monks ever since, but the school was on Narragansett Bay.
Portsmouth Abbey.
Portsmouth Abbey.
Right.
And the bay would freeze over. We had severe winters. But the Coast Guard ice breakers would cut a channel in the ice so that the big ships going to and from Providence could get in and out. And so we would walk out on the ice, like a half a mile out on the ice, so we could smoke cigarettes undisturbed. And one day I was standing right at the edge of the ice, maybe 3/4 of a mile out, and a freighter passed by, and there was a crewman on the poop deck, coiling lines, and he looked at and saw this sort of improbable sight: a 16-year-old in a blazer and tie smoking a cigarette. And he I guess he was sort of charmed by this apparition, and he did something very cool. He said, as in,
come
jump.
Come with me.
And that was a very romantic moment to me, and I decided one day I would go to sea. And so I did.
Steaming to Bamboola, I'm quoting here. I won't go on and on. You've flattered me, so I will flatter you.
Please.
The book is full of character, and the dialogue is super. All right.
Let thy praise flow trippingly from the tongue.
When he was not yelling and carrying on, the bosun ran a poker game. He was making crazy bets, $100 on the cut of the cards, $100 on whether pork chops would be served for dinner tomorrow. He had almost no booze left, which put a desperate edge on his drinking. One morning, Slim, different character, Slim ran up to the captain's cabin and begged him for just one can of beer. Slim never drank at all, so the captain asked him why. Slim said the bosun was going to give him a cuckoo clock in exchange for it.
I'd forgotten that.
The captain handed Slim the beer and shook his head. He was hoping the booze would run out soon. Things were getting out of hand. So this book appears when you're 29 years old. And now that you've told me the fellow staff members at the Yale Daily News magazine, maybe, but did you, I'm trying hard not to make this sound like sheer flattery. Did you know how good you were? The book was extremely well reviewed.
How do I answer that? The process of writing it,
yes,
persuaded me that I was arguably the worst writer in the world. I was very fortunate to have as an editor a really great man of American letters. My editor was a guy named Tom Congdon,
yes,
who is slightly more famous than being my editor, than for editing a book about a vengeful shark. I believe the title was Jaws, and it became, I think at the time, a bigger seller than the Bible. But I handed it, I worked on this very, very hard. I handed it in. I think there were 650 pages, which to a rookie writer feels cool.
Right.
You feel, oh my God, I'm Dostoevsky. Here, 650 pages.
big typescript.
And Tom called. He said, "It's wonderful. It's even better than I had hoped." And so I walked on air for about 2 weeks, and then arrives in the mail a rather suspiciously thick manila envelope with Tom's notes, 50 pages, single-spaced. And I called him. I said, "But, Tom, I thought you liked it. I thought you said it was good." He said, "It is, and it's going to be so much better."
So I realize as we speak that you and I are talking about a lost world. We remember it, but it's a lost world. Is there an editor in New York who would give line-by-line notes like that today? 50 pages of single-spaced notes?
I have a sense that the late Bob Gottlieb, who is considered the greatest book editor of our era, who has been Robert Caro's editor on 4 or at this point 5 volumes of Lyndon Johnson bios. I get the sense he may well have been. Bob Gottlieb was also famously editor of Catch-22, one of the great, probably arguably the great comic novel, American comic novel of the 20th century. I don't know, but it's the stories one hears are sobering. One of my great friends was Sylvia Morris, wife of Edmund Morris, a great biographer, and she was a great biographer, and I hardly urge anyone watching this to read her 2 volumes of Clare Boothe Luce, who was, I think, really the outstanding woman, American woman of the 20th century, for reasons good and maybe otherwise.
But wonderfully readable.
Amazingly.
Even the bad bits. Nasty bits.
The point of my story, and I do have one, is so Sylvia hands in volume 2, which is a stunning work. And 7 weeks go by with no word from her editor. And she's now, now imagine that, 7 weeks. And she's worked on this for 15 years. And then, finally on week 8, her phone rings. She says, "Oh, it's great."
All right, the world has changed.
Yeah.
The Satirist appears. 1986, the publication of your first novel, The White House Mess, narrated by Herbert Wadlow, an assistant to the fictional President Tucker. And the opening scene takes place as the newly elected President Tucker arrives at the White House to move in on Inauguration Day.
On January 20th, 1989.
1989. And the then outgoing incumbent Ronald Reagan simply decides that he doesn't care to leave. This is Herb, said the president-elect, barely above a whisper. This is Tucker talking to Wadlow, the narrator and main character. We have a situation here. President Reagan won't leave. The president-elect turned to President Reagan's physician. "Commander, is there something you can do?" The commander said the president might respond to 2 cc's of adrenaline, but that at his age it might provoke an undesirable reaction. When the president-elect asked what sort of undesirable reaction, the commander replied, "Death." A tabloid headline played before my eyes, "Reagan killed by injection by incoming president." I am not usually forceful at meetings, but I spoke up and offered my frank opinion that this was not a viable option, close quote. Okay, wonderful. Questions. Why from fiction to nonfiction? And why you and I sat in desks next to each other writing speeches for George H.W. Bush, whom you revered and continue to revere.
And he's looming larger and larger.
And you were totally down with the end of the Cold War program of cutting taxes.
You and I, together,
we won
the Cold War. Let's pat ourselves on the back.
After all these years, credit where credit is due. But at some level, in the back of your mind, you're watching it all happen and thinking, this is perfectly preposterous. You must have been at some level. So why do you move from nonfiction to fiction, and why are you satirizing a life that you led?
Well, I worked for Mr. Bush for, I guess, a total of almost 2 years. And in the course of that, being at the White House, I read recreationally a lot of White House memoirs. As you know, anyone who has worked at the White House for more than 5 minutes writes at least a 500-page memoir about their time there, which usually has in the title the word power, principle, and other rather inflated nouns. But I became fascinated by this sort of subgenre of White House memoirs. And it was one of those rare moments where, a light bulb goes off. You thought, that would be fun to parody. Because, also in the course of working at the White House, I learned a lot about the White House and stuff that I could use. And it opens with that scene. The book came out in 1986, while, President Reagan was halfway through his second term. The notion in 1986 of a president reluctant to leave the White House was, shall we say, still a quaint notion.
Yes.
Even comic. And the opening of the book sort of gave it headlines, it gave it traction, and it became, a New York Times bestseller, which was very nice. But at one point, I began to worry that the Reagans, whom I had known for many years, I began to think, oh dear, I wonder if they're finding this funny too. And in a press interview with the Washington Post, I admitted that I was a little bit nervous as to what their reaction would be. In short order, arrived a handwritten note. Just said, "The White House," and no stamp. So, who gets to do that? And so I tremulously opened it, and it was a handwritten note from the Gipper, from Ronald Reagan, saying, "Dear Chris, I just wanted to say I'm delighted by the book and tickled to have been part of its success."
Lovely.
And, what grace. What grace was there? Who else would write that? Well, I'll tell you who else would write that. George H.W. Bush.
George Bush would have written that.
Yeah.
George Bush would have written that.
They both possessed extraordinary grace and decency.
And it mattered to both of them. Gentlemanliness mattered to both of them.
Utterly. As you recall, you spent a lot more time in the Oval Office than I did. Mr. Reagan never took off his jacket.
Correct.
In the Oval Office because he thought it would have been disrespectful.
To his own office.
To his own office.
Little Green Men, the list of your satires goes on and on. Let's pause for a moment, though. In 1994, and Thank You for Smoking. Incidentally, our friend, the journalist Andy Ferguson, Andy and I were talking the other day, and he said, The White House Mess and Thank You for Smoking are the two funniest books ever written about Washington. You and I have the same regard for Andy. Coming from Andy, that means something.
I think Andy is, for my money, among the top 3 writers of our generation, and into the bargain, a lovely, lovely man.
He is
a great friend of the late P.J. O'Rourke, whom I think we all miss deeply. Anyway, Andy obviously is also a man of excellent literary taste. He said self-servingly.
Main character, and Thank You for Smoking, is Nick Naylor, who is a completely winsome character, intelligent, warm, funny, sweet, and a lobbyist for the tobacco industry. Thank You for Smoking is such a hit that it is turned into a film, 2005 film of the same title, Thank You for Smoking. A brief excerpt from that film.
This is obviously a heated issue, and we do have a lot that we want to cover today. Nick, do you have a question?
Joan, how on earth would big tobacco profit off of the loss of this young man? Now, I hate to think in such callous terms, but if anything, we'd be losing a customer. It's not only our hope, it's in our best interest to keep Robin alive and smoking.
That's ludicrous.
Let me tell you something, Joan, and please, let me share something with the fine, concerned people in the audience today. The Ron Goodies of this world want the Robin Willigers to die. You know why? So that their budgets will go up. This is nothing less than trafficking in human misery. And you, sir, ought to be ashamed of you.
Where did Nick Naylor come from? How did you devise this character?
I tell you exactly.
So outrageous.
Many years ago, I was watching, as it was then called, the McNeil-Lehrer report, and the latest scientific evidence had just been established that smoking isn't good for you. This was evidence number 19,342. So they had on the scientist who had published this paper in the New England Journal of Medicine, and he had like so many PhDs after his name that it wouldn't have fit on a business card. And as he spoke, you could almost see the footnotes scrolling beneath him. So, because of notions of fairness, old-fashioned notions of fairness and balance, they had on a very attractive woman, and attractive in a sort of a Lauren Bacallish way, from the Tobacco Institute to offer an opposing viewpoint. And every time this poor epidemiologist said something, she just went, "Oh, please." Where are the data? She said, I think grammatically correctly, where are the data? And I fell in love. I thought, what a fascinating job that must be. You get up in the morning, brush your teeth, dress the kids, send them off to school, and then go to the office and sell death, for a living. And so that was the genesis.
The writing life, friends and heroes, Christopher Buckley and Christopher Hitchens. Everything he said was brilliant. You were very close friends with Christopher Hitchens. You became a close friend of Joseph Heller, although different generations. Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22. You were very close to P.J. O'Rourke. You knew Hunter Thompson. You knew Tom Wolfe.
I'm trying. If we were talking about, if all these people were painters, I would be the guy who painting by numbers with crayons, in the middle of the Louvre with canvases by, people like that. I count myself very lucky, to have known these people, and I miss them. They're all, everyone you just mentioned is gone.
Is gone.
And I spoke at four.
PJ who?
Four. All I do these days is eulogies. PJ, Christopher, Heller, and Tom Wolfe. But I mean, I got to know, I consider myself very fortunate to have gotten to know, these giants. These were gods in my world.
What influence did they have on you as writer? Did you study anybody's style?
Well, I think you're consciously or unconsciously always studying their style. I remember in college, the two hot writers we all worshipped from afar were Tom Wolfe and Hunter Thompson. Mm. And as rookies, newbies, I believe in current parlance, we committed the cardinal idiocy of imitating them. So, pretending to write, we're channeling Tom Wolfe and Hunter Thompson. And nothing is, if you showed me stuff that I wrote in those days in that vein, I would ask one of the technicians with us, please, to hand me Mel Gibson's returned pistol so that I could shoot myself. The worst thing, a young writer can do is to imitate. Although I would note that
but you have to go through it, don't you think?
Hunter Thompson worked at Time magazine at one point. I think he also may have worked at Sports Illustrated, but I think it was while he was a very, very low-level writer. And while he was there, he retyped Hemingway novels because he wanted to figure out how to do it. And that struck me as now.
That is setting up your easel at the Louvre.
That is setting up
copying Renoir,
copying Renoir,
brushstroke by brushstroke, isn't it? Yeah. All right. By the way, but I grant I'm willing to put up with everything you said, even though you are a master of self-deprecation. But you know,
well, as they say in Hollywood, if you can fake sincerity, you got it made.
So, but this book is published when you're 29, and there's nothing imitative about it. There's no passage. Oh well, this is second-rate Hemingway, or this is an attempt. There's nothing like that in here. So there is an active synthesis taking place in the young Buckley, and it takes place very fast. All right. I'm just going to force you. I'm not even going to let you comment on that one. You're going to have to listen.
I think we'll just leave that right
take
there.
that compliment. The Satirist of Late. The Relic Master, 2015. The action takes place in 16th century Europe. A forger of religious relics tricks a royal collector into believing he has acquired Christ's burial shroud. When he's found out, he's forced to make up for it by stealing the real shroud. The Judge Hunter, 2018. This time the action takes place after the restoration of Charles II. A young Englishman is sent to the New World to track down two of the judges responsible for the execution of the king's father, Charles I. Kirkus Reviews calls this, quote, a witty bromance about international intrigue, close quote. Incidentally, H.R. McMaster, former national security advisor.
And a great American and a fantastic writer.
I'm so happy that you complimented him, because he wanted me to tell you that he loved The Judge Hunter. All right.
That's high praise. I'm sure undeserved, but
from
terrific guy.
From political satire to historical fiction. Why? You had a great gig going there with the political stuff.
Well, it was I had done political satire by that point. I'd probably, I don't know, banged out 10 or so.
Little Green Men.
And frankly, Peter, and I wouldn't be surprised if you agreed with this assessment. By this time, American politics had kind of become auto-satirical. I mean, I'm not sure it needed satirizing. Another element of it was, let's try something different.
Right.
And the historical novels I found really quite fascinating, because you have to do a lot of research. You have to, read. I mean, I probably read 50 books, to write each one of these. But it was like being back in college, only fun.
I see.
But it was all
you say 50 books and it sounds onerous, but actually you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You wanted to get the period. You wanted to get the details right, but also the feel right.
Yeah. And to do that, you got to do your homework.
Yeah.
But the writing I found very challenging, and I actually don't mean this as a sly way of in a self-satisfied way, but I don't think I could write those books now. I'm 72. I was in my early 60s when I wrote those, and I don't think I have the
stamina,
the energy, the stamina.
I'm not going to talk you out of that one right now, anyway. Two particular figures, the Vishnu and your father. First, the Vishnu. Everyone listening to this is saying, who on earth is the Vishnu? And you're going to tell us. Let me begin. Christopher Buckley and George H.W. Bush. Mr. Bush was, to be sure, an Yankee blue blood establishmentarian. but he was always winking at you. The Vishnu was the most considerate man I have ever known. The Vishnu?
I went to work for Mr. Bush in 1981. This is now referred to as the pre-Peter Robinson era. And he had recently been gifted, to use that odd verb, a statue by I think the Indonesian ambassador to the United States, whom he had known when Mr. Bush was the US ambassador to the United Nations, had been gifted a statue of the Hindu god Vishnu with a plaque describing in great detail all of the Vishnu's individual powers, which amounted to supreme omnipotence. So Mr. Bush sort of, he liked this, and he got a kick out of it. And because he was a man of excellent jest, which is not necessarily a Yankee, New England Yankee quality, he began referring to himself playfully as the Vishnu. So we'd be on Air Force Two taking off from Minneapolis after a campaign swing there. And over the PA system would come a voice saying, "This is the Vishnu speaking. The Vishnu is well pleased by today's visit to Minneapolis and has ordered an extra tot of rum for all the lesser deities." And anyway, so we all referred to him, at least on the campus, as the Vish. Hey, we've got to go see the Vish about the speech or whatever. Late in his life, I went to visit him in Kennebunkport, and he was at this point not far from the end, and Parkinson's and other ailments had sort of locked him down bodily, and I told him I said, it's good to see you, Fish, and he'd forgotten, and I told him. So I told him.
You reminded him of this,
and his face, which had been a bit imprisoned by the medications, there was a distinct smile, and that gleam came in, and it was really all I could do. He was a dear, dear man, and I think our country misses him greatly. I know you miss him.
I do. Losing Mom and Pup, 2009, a memoir of your final year with your parents, William F. Buckley Jr. and Patricia Taylor Buckley, who is less known, but was one of the most remarkable people I've ever known.
Yes. A cross between a Noel Coward character and a snapping turtle.
She made up her mind quickly about people, but if she liked you, and for one of the great privileges of my life was that somehow or other, within a minute of meeting me, she decided I was all right.
You made the cut.
You were all right forever.
Their bodies strewn over the landscape of belonging to those who did not make the cut. But she was quite something.
I shouldn't, this is your show, not mine, but there was an event, a fundraising event, I think it was for the Dartmouth Review, and your father was kind enough to come. And your mother came, and she saw me. So I came, and everyone was seated, so I got down on my knees next to her, which actually was the correct thing to do with your mother.
She would have liked that.
And she said, "Peter, what am I doing here?" So I had to explain what the Dartmouth, I think I had to tell her what Dartmouth was. Yes. Anyway, that was, and yet at the same, I won't go on and on, but we visited, when my children were little, 5 children. And at this time, one of them was still an infant. And your mother had set up the table, making no concession to childhood at all. The heavy silver.
Finger bowls.
Except that one of the chairs was a high chair. And she conducted and went to, and then she said, "Children, pay attention. I'm going to show you how to use a finger ball." All right.
I have a feeling that will be a memory with your children
With my children.
for many, many years.
From Losing Mom and Pup. Years ago, Pup gave an interview to Playboy. Pup is your term for your father. Pup gave an interview to Playboy magazine, asked why he did this. He couldn't resist saying, "In order to communicate with my 16-year-old son." At the end of the interview, he was asked what he would like for an epitaph, and he replied, "I know that my Redeemer liveth." Only Pup could manage to work the Book of Job into a Hugh Hefner publication.
I used that in my eulogy to Pup at St. Patrick's.
I was in pews. This year marks the centenary of your father's birth. In what ways is this being celebrated?
Well, the U.S. Postal Service on September 9th will unveil a stamp, a commemorative stamp honoring Pup. And it's, you can't be blasé about having a dad who was on a stamp. It occurred to me, I was asked for a comment about it by the Washington Post when it was announced just a few days ago. And my comment was, makes me want to take up stamp collecting. But you always think of something better on the way out.
Yes.
The French call it the esprit de l'escalier, that the escalier being the staircase
Yes.
that you walk down after the dinner. And it occurred to me, Pup, in the inaugural issue of National Review in 1955,
Yes.
declared in its that its National Review's mission would be to stand athwart history yelling, "Stop." And I wished I had had the wit to say to the Washington Post, now Pup is standing athwart history yelling, "Stamp."
What?
Why? It always happens too late. But anyway, I'm delighted, and I urge you all viewers, to the stamp will be available for advance purchase on August 9th. So I urge 30,000 post offices that stamp will be available at 30,000 post offices, or on usps.com.
All right. A century. What should we? This is a staggering thought to the likes of you and me, but a lot of viewers will simply not remember the Cold War. They certainly won't remember 1955.
Well, you weren't alive.
I don't remember.
I was alive,
1955.
but really,
very dim
it
memories.
went right over my head.
So what should people grasp about your father?
Well, there are, I believe, not far from where we are sitting at this table, in the Hoover Institute archive, the original tapes of the 1,504 episodes of Firing Line that he taped between 1966 and 1999 when he gave it up. He was, I think at the time he retired, he held the record for longest single host of a show. And those, all those episodes, I can't claim to have seen all 1,504, but they established a level of civility and yet inquiry that I think is still unmatched, except isn't there a program called Uncommon Knowledge? Yes. And I'm going to just sit still, because I'm going to say something nice about you. That you are an admirable heir to the standards that Pop set. He was never mean. He was very often on the attack, but he was attacking you not on personal grounds or necessarily ideological grounds, but if you were going to debate with him, you had better have your argument ready. And he had everyone on. He was a gentleman, my father. I never honestly heard him say anything mean about anyone, even Gore Vidal, with whom he famously clashed. And he felt very abashed about that moment. And the only time, that happened in 1968, Vidal left us, not a moment too soon, sometime around, 2010 or so. But I never, the only time Pop ever mentioned Gore Vidal after that was in a oddly positive context. I remember Vidal was offered a chair at the American Institute of Arts and Letters.
Yes.
And Vidal, he declined it, saying, "Thanks, but I already have Diners Club." And Pop thought that was about the funniest thing he'd ever heard.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, no, he would.
Oh, really?
I heard him cite that 20 times.
Really? Really?
Anyway, so I think he set a standard which we would all do well to revere.
All right. So you're mentioning this exchange between your father and Gore Vidal. At one point, years ago, I went into the stacks of the Stanford Library and found the issues of Esquire in which those two men had explained themselves to the extent, in one issue, your father, and as I recall, it was the second issue, the next issue was Gore Vidal. I think your father went first. Each of those men wrote 5,000 words, published in a then popular magazine in Esquire. And what I found so striking when I went back and looked at both of those essays is that the editor had not relieved the text with call-outs or boxes or photographic inserts. It was assumed that the subscriber to Esquire magazine was a reader and would enjoy these 5,000 words. I would agree with you and your father that Gore Vidal had very serious drawbacks. In fact, he was the craziest guest I ever had on this program.
Wow.
But he could handle prose. And those two essays were simple. By the way, the last two words of your father's 5,000 words, 4,999 or 5,000.
Hereby apologize.
I
to Gore Vidal.
apologize. Yes, I apologize. So Christopher, how do you and I tease out the natural tendency to remember the past fondly from actual serious changes in the wider culture, about which, honestly, it might in some way even be our duty to warn our children and their generation, a loss of gentlemanliness as an ideal, as something that people took very seriously. The three men, we were talking about Reagan and George H.W. Bush and your dad, and to them, gentlemanly behaviors, civility, it was distinct from, your father admired polemics. I remember his telling me that Hitchens, about whom he had some reservations. Well, but he loved his polemic ability. Nevertheless,
he was
they were all, so gentlemanliness and the literacy. Reagan would never have felt at home in the faculty lounge at Yale, but that man read and wrote constantly. Don't you agree? How do we tease it out?
Well, there are certain obstacles to civil discourse. It's in the form of this,
Right.
and the instant communication. Jonathan Haidt is the author of a current bestseller saying, we are destroying our children by allowing them unfettered access to the internet and iPhones. And there are movements now taking root where you have to surrender your iPhone
when you walk in the schoolroom
when you
door.
walk in the schoolroom door, and I'm all in favor of that. There are, when you and I were growing up, there were 3 TV channels and one extra which was always on Channel 13.
Yes.
And you had to use a round and
Yes, exactly. And it was called educational television.
educational
Remember that?
TV.
Yes.
And I think over, at any given evening, roughly over half the households in America would be listening to Walter Cronkite.
Right.
Who, and this, and you turn on the TV today, and you immediately hear the sound of barking, and
By the way,
and language that, had you used it at home, your mother would have stuck a bar of soap in your mouth.
Right.
These are impediments, and now these words are uttered from the highest podia in the country. So I don't know how we get back to that, but we all raise our own children, and a lot depends on that. But the odds are, my father used to say, he was a devout Catholic, and he used to say, despair is a mortal sin. So one must not despair, but one must make efforts to be civil. I believe the Bible expresses it as do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Sounds quaint, still pretty good.
Still pretty good
advice.
Yes. You mentioned your father and the Hoover Institution. Thanks to your father's son, Christopher Buckley,
that would be me.
That would be you on this, his centenary celebration. The Hoover Institution not only holds the original master films of 1,504 episodes of Firing Line, but this typewriter. Tell me about this typewriter.
Well, this is the typewriter that launched the modern conservative movement. This is the typewriter on which he typed that National Review's mission would be to stand athwart history, yelling, "Stamp!" So I'm going to touch it one last time. This was his typewriter at National Review, and as I approach my own doubtlessly disappointing interview with St. Peter, I thought it was time that it go somewhere where it will be cherished.
It will be cherished.
I wrote a book you mentioned called The Relic Master. This is a relic, and there's something about relics. Anyway, I'm very pleased, and I think he would be pleased.
I think he would.
That it's going somewhere where it will be loved and taken good care of, and you might even be able to find a ribbon on eBay. But you might.
It's a royal.
It'll probably take some looking for.
Thank you. Christopher, last couple of questions here for now. My demise won't terribly far off your demise, so I'm really rather
Let
not
us
hearing you
not
talk
speak
about
of your demise.
Let us not speak of demises.
I'm much older than
Oh,
you.
please. If I may quote the tobacco industry lobbyist, oh, please. All right. Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, your father. There was an email exchange or a phone call. I honestly can't remember quite what. But when we lost one of these men, you said to me, the adults are leaving.
The grown-ups are leaving.
And there's nobody left but us children.
But us children.
So as we approach our own demises, how do you think they would judge the job we've done? If they were the greatest generation, do you think we can skate past as the adequate generation?
That should be the title of your next book.
My next book, The Adequate Generation.
I miss the three people you've just mentioned deeply. I have to say, I'm a little glad they're not around to see what's going on now. I think it would. I think they all three possessed an inner sunniness that was almost like had the force of atomic generators, and I think they would not despair. But I have to say I'm sort of glad they're not around to see it. As to how they would judge us.
Let us pass on to other matters.
Tell them there will be no dinner tonight and no TV for a week.
I want to linger on that point just a moment because I hadn't thought of it this way, but you're exactly right. One of the things that all three of those men had in common was a cheerfulness, but I almost wish there were a heavier sounding word because their cheerfulness was not superficial. It was not a mere, all three men had paid a price for their cheerfulness. George H.W. Bush, cheerfulness was almost a duty of one's approach as an American and a gentleman. He'd been shot down as an 18-year-old.
And lost a beloved daughter to leukemia at age 4.
All three of these men had suffered the full share of life's sufferings and remained optimistic and cheerful.
I think the word you're looking for is grace.
Yes.
They all were possessed of extraordinary grace, from which I suppose we get the adjective or the noun verb graciousness. But it's, I think, one of the cardinal virtues, if not the cardinal virtue, in religion, in the church that I grew up in, which was my father's. He was a very devout Catholic. Mr. Bush was a very devout Episcopalian. And I think dear Mr. Reagan was kind of sort of a modern deist. But I think he believed in providence.
Yes, he did.
As Thomas Jefferson, who was who was non-denominational. But it's this, not to get new agey about it, but it's this glow. It's an inner glow, from which the other virtues derive, the capacity to forgive. Mr. Bush, I never heard him say a mean word about anyone. I never heard my father say a mean word. He might not have particularly admired someone. And I don't think Ronald Reagan ever probably. They didn't these three. They didn't have a mean bone in their bodies.
They really did not.
And that made them, I think, who they were.
Christopher, would you close our conversation? I return to your first book.
But enough about them.
We haven't mentioned your books of essays, one of which is titled. But
I
enough
know. I
about
feel
you, but
actually
enough about you.
I'm kind of
You're hurt, are you?
kind of hurt.
Would you bring us to a close by reading the epilogue of Steaming to Bamboola?
A few minutes before midnight, the ship sailed for Puerto Rico. In the dark, none of the signs of her old age were visible. None of the rust streaks, none of the dings. Her black hull shone under the glare of the spotlights, and there was stubborn dignity in the way she resisted the pull of the tugs. As she moved away from the wharf with a rumbling in her boilers, there was shouting from the bridge. It was the captain. His walkie-talkie must have failed. He was yelling toward the bow, drowned out by other noises. As she moved into mid-channel and the tugs prepared to release their lines, I caught sight of a seaman standing on the poop deck, lighting a cigarette. He saw me there on the shore and waved, and I watched until she rounded a bend downriver and was gone.
Okay. That will be edited out. Thank you very much. No.
I'd leave it in.
You bastards, you would, wouldn't you? Christopher Buckley, thank you.
Thank you, pal.
For Uncommon Knowledge, the Hoover Institution, and Fox Nation, I'm Peter Robinson.